The valley darkness consumed everything like a living thing. SEAL Team 6 Delta crouched behind rain-soaked boulders, their ammunition nearly exhausted, their escape routes severed. Enemy shadows multiplied along the ridgeline. Machine gun fire tore through the air in brutal waves. Commander Reyes knew they had 3 minutes before complete annihilation. Then, as hope collapsed into dust, a single rifle shot pierced the night clean, distant, lethal. 700 meters away, an enemy fighter dropped. Another shot, another body. A nameless sniper was protecting them from the darkness. The briefing had been straightforward. Extract the hard drive, eliminate the target if possible, return before dawn. Commander Jacob Reyes stood in the operations tent, studying satellite imagery of Korash Valley, a jagged wound carved into the mountain range where 3 borders met and governments pretended not to see. Weather window closes in 6 hours, the mission coordinator said, tapping the projection. After that, you're looking at 3 days of electrical storms. No air support, no satellite uplink. Reyes nodded, his jaw tight. Beside him stood the 4 men who'd followed him through a dozen hellholes just like this one. Daniel Hawk Morrison, their scout, possessed eyes that caught movement in absolute darkness. Trevor Mason navigated terrain like he'd been born in these mountains. Carlos Ortiz carried medical supplies that had saved more lives than anyone could count. Vincent Viper Shaw handled explosives with the gentle precision of a surgeon. They'd trained together for 18 months. They trusted each other with the only currency that mattered in their world, their lives. The target is a data cache, Reyes told them as they geared up. Intelligence suggests it contains operational details for attacks planned across 4 continents. The group holding it calls themselves the Korash Brotherhood. Approximately 20 fighters confirmed in the valley. Approximately, Hawk muttered, checking his rifle optics. Love that word. Intel's always approximate until we're standing in it, Mason said. They inserted at 2,200 hours via a high-altitude low-opening jump that left them scattered across 2 kilometers of mountainside. The rally point was a dry stream bed marked on their maps as Echo 7. Reyes arrived first, scanning the darkness through his night vision goggles. The world glowed green and grainy. One by one, his team materialized from the shadows. All accounted for, Ortiz confirmed. They moved in tactical formation, weapons raised, spacing perfect. The valley floor was a maze of boulders and thorny vegetation that grabbed at their gear. Above them, clouds rolled across the mountains, heavy with the storm the meteorologists had promised. The target building sat in a depression 3 clicks south, an abandoned mining facility that the Brotherhood had repurposed as a command post. Drone surveillance showed minimal exterior security, which immediately raised Reyes' suspicions. Groups like the Brotherhood didn't survive this long by being careless. Too quiet, Hawk whispered as they approached the outer perimeter. He was right. The facility should have had roving patrols, perimeter alarms, something. Instead, they encountered a single sleeping guard who never woke up after Viper's silenced approach. Inside, they found the hard drive exactly where intelligence had indicated, sitting on a desk in what appeared to be a communications room. Mason secured it in a waterproof case while Reyes studied the maps spread across the table. Something felt wrong. The maps showed their insertion point, their likely routes, even Echo 7 circled in red ink. They knew we were coming, Reyes said quietly. The explosion that answered him came from outside, a directed blast that collapsed the main entrance. Secondary explosions followed, sealing the other exits. Then, the lights cut out, plunging them into darkness, broken only by emergency lighting that flickered like dying stars. Roof access, Mason shouted, already moving. They climbed through a maintenance shaft as gunfire erupted below. The Brotherhood hadn't abandoned this facility, they'd converted it into a trap. Reyes cursed himself for not seeing it sooner. Intelligence had been too clean, too specific. Someone had fed them exactly what they needed to walk into this ambush. They emerged onto the roof to find the valley transformed. Dozens of armed fighters surrounded the facility, their muzzle flashes creating a deadly constellation. More were arriving, vehicles grinding up the access road with their headlights cutting through the dust. 70+ contacts, Hawk estimated, his voice flat with professional assessment. We're blocked on all sides. Reyes tried the radio. Static answered, him thick, intentional jamming that meant communications were dead. The storm was building overhead, which meant even if they broke through the jamming, Satellite coverage would be spotty at best. Southwest ridge, he decided. Move fast, stay low. We fight our way to high ground and call for extraction once we're clear of the jamming. It was a plan born of desperation, but it was the only option that didn't end with them dying in this building. The run to the ridge should have taken 15 minutes. It took 40 because the Brotherhood had positioned fighting positions along every logical route. Reyes led them through a gauntlet of machine gun fire and improvised explosives that turned the landscape into a killing field. Mason took point, his knowledge of terrain keeping them alive as he found paths between the ambush points. But the enemy adapted quickly, shifting forces to cut off each new route. They weren't just numerous, they were organized, disciplined, and clearly operating under someone who understood military tactics. D-Sheshk heavy machine gun, 11 o'clock. Viper called out, identifying the distinctive sound of the Soviet-era weapon that could tear through their body armor like paper. They dove behind a cluster of boulders as the gun opened up, rounds chipping stone and sending fragments into the air like shrapnel. Ortiz returned fire with controlled bursts, forcing the gunner to keep his head down while they relocated. But there was nowhere to relocate to. Every direction offered new threats. Reyes watched their tactical situation deteriorate with each passing minute. They'd already burned through 40% of their ammunition, and rescue was hours away even if they could call for it. Then the drones appeared, crude commercial models modified to carry thermal cameras and small explosive charges. The Brotherhood was using them to track the team's heat signatures through the darkness. "They're hurting us," Mason said, breathing hard, "pushing us toward the gorge." Reyes saw it too. Every route they took, every position they held, the enemy let them go in only one direction, down into the narrow canyon that cut through the valley floor. It was a natural choke point, steep walls on both sides, limited visibility, no room to maneuver, a death trap for anyone caught inside it. "We don't have a choice," Reyes said. "If we stay here, they'll surround us completely." Hawk gestured to Shaw, who was limping badly from shrapnel that had torn through his left leg during their escape from the facility. "Viper's not going to make it much further on that leg." Ortiz was already working, applying pressure bandages and injecting morphine. "I can keep him moving, but he needs proper medical attention within 6 hours." 6 hours. They'd all be dead in 6 hours at this rate. Reyes made the call. Into the gorge, standard leapfrog formation. "Hawk, your rear guard, shoot anything that follows us." They descended into the canyon as the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it became a downpour that turned the rocky ground treacherous and reduced visibility to almost nothing. The Brotherhood fighters followed, their numbers seeming to multiply in the darkness. The gorge narrowed until they were moving single file, weapons raised, every sense screaming danger. Water rushed down from higher elevations, creating streams that made footing uncertain. Above them, the enemy occupied the ridgelines, using their elevated positions to rain down fire. They reached a boulder field, where several large rocks had fallen from the canyon walls, creating a rough defensive position. Reyes called a halt, knowing they couldn't run anymore. Viper was barely conscious from pain and blood loss. The rest of them were exhausted, wet, and running on fumes. "Ammunition count," Reyes ordered. The numbers came back worse than he'd feared. Mason had 3 magazines left. Hawk had 4. Ortiz had 2 plus his sidearm. Viper was down to a single magazine. Reyes himself had 4 remaining, plus 2 grenades. Roughly 30% of combat load, he calculated, against 70-plus enemy fighters in a defensive position with high ground advantage. "So basically screwed," Hawk said without inflection. Mason checked his rifle's optic, wiping rain from the lens. "We could try to break through before they fully encircle us? With Viper?" Ortiz shook his head. He'd never make it. "Hell, I'm not sure any of us would." Reyes studied the terrain through the rain and darkness. The boulder field offered decent cover, but no escape routes. The enemy would eventually bring up heavy weapons and simply obliterate their position. Or they'd wait for daylight, when air support could arrive, except air support wasn't coming in this storm. "We hold here," he decided. "Make them pay for every meter. Maybe we'll get lucky, and the weather will break." Nobody responded to that fantasy. They all knew what holding here meant. It meant making their last stand. It meant dying in this miserable canyon thousands of miles from home, their bodies probably never recovered, their families receiving folded flags and careful explanations that revealed nothing about how they'd actually died. Reyes had written too many of those letters himself. The enemy came at them in waves, testing their defenses, probing for weaknesses. Each assault was a calculated exchange, Brotherhood fighters expending ammunition and bodies to force the Americans to burn through their limited magazines. "They're counting our shots," Hawk observed after the third assault broke apart. Professional work. He was right. The Brotherhood commander was smart enough to recognize that the SEAL team couldn't sustain a long engagement. All he had to do was maintain pressure and wait for them to run dry. Reyes redistributed ammunition, consolidating their remaining magazines to ensure each man had enough for at least one sustained firefight. It gave them maybe 20 minutes of combat capability. After that, they'd be down to pistols and knives. "Commander," Mason said quietly, "you should know I pulled this from the target building." He handed over a tablet computer they'd grabbed along with the hard drive. Reyes powered it on, shielding the screen from the rain. What he saw made his blood run cold. Detailed dossiers on their team, photos, biographical information, operational history. The Brotherhood hadn't just known they were coming, they'd known exactly who was coming. This wasn't an ambush. It was an assassination mission specifically designed to eliminate SEAL Team 6 Delta. "Someone sold us out," Ortiz said, reading over his shoulder. "Later," Reyes said, shutting off the tablet. "Right now, we focus on survival." But the revelation changed everything. This wasn't bad luck or poor intelligence. This was a deliberate setup. Someone in the chain of command, someone with access to classified mission details, had betrayed them. The question of who would have to wait, assuming any of them lived long enough to ask it. The next assault came harder. 24 fighters coordinated their approach, using suppressing fire to pin the Americans down, while assault elements moved forward under cover. Reyes burned through a full magazine, stopping them, his rifle heating up from sustained fire. 10 o'clock, heavy weapons team, Hawk called out. Reyes saw them 2 fighters setting up what looked like an RPG launcher. A single rocket into their position would end this fight immediately. He aimed carefully, compensating for wind and rain, and squeezed the trigger. The first fighter dropped. The second grabbed the launcher, but Mason's shot caught him in the chest before he could fire. "That's going to piss them off," Viper muttered. Despite his injuries, he'd propped himself against a boulder and was maintaining a firing position. His face was gray with blood loss, but his hands remained steady. Ortiz pressed another bandage to the leg wound. "I'm doing everything I can, but he needs a hospital. Soon." "Add it to the list," Hawk said, dropping an enemy fighter who'd gotten too close. The rain intensified, turning the boulder field into a morass of mud and streaming water. It reduced visibility, but also made it harder for the enemy to coordinate their attacks. Small mercies in a situation that offered nothing else. Reyes checked his watch. They'd been in the canyon for 90 minutes. Dawn was still 4 hours away. The storm would continue for at least 12 more hours, according to the pre-mission weather brief. No rescue was coming, no air support would appear. They were alone. "Ammunition status," he called out. The responses confirmed what he already knew. They were below 20% of combat load. Another sustained firefight would leave them empty. After that, it would come down to pistols and hand-to-hand combat against an enemy that outnumbered them 15-1. "I want everyone to know," Reyes said, his voice carrying through the rain. "It's been an honor serving with you. All of you. Whatever happens next, we hold this ground. We make them remember that they tangled with the best warriors this country ever produced." "Hooah," Mason said quietly. "Hooah," the others echoed. The enemy began their next assault, and Reyes knew with absolute certainty that this was the beginning of the end. The Brotherhood fighters advanced in a disciplined line, their weapons firing in controlled bursts that forced the SEAL team to keep their heads down. Reyes watched through a gap between boulders, calculating angles, conserving his remaining ammunition for shots that mattered. A fighter rose from cover, sprinting forward with an assault rifle. Reyes tracked him, preparing to fire. The man's head snapped back, a spray of blood visible even through the rain. He collapsed mid-stride, dead before he hit the ground. But Reyes hadn't fired. Nobody on his team had fired. "What the hell?" Hawk said. 10 seconds later, it happened again. The heavy machine gunner who'd been raking their position suddenly slumped forward over his weapon. A neat hole punched through his skull. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle echoed across the canyon, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Sniper," Mason said. "Ours?" "Can't be," Reyes responded, scanning the ridgelines. "We don't have anyone in this operational theater." But someone was shooting, and they were shooting Brotherhood fighters with mechanical precision. Another man dropped, then another. Each shot was clean, efficient, and came from a completely different angle than the last. The Brotherhood forces began to scatter, abandoning their assault to seek cover from this new threat. 700 meters minimum, Hawk estimated, watching another enemy fighter fall, maybe more in this weather. That's exceptional shooting. The pattern continued. Every 15 to 20 seconds, another Brotherhood fighter died. The unseen sniper was targeting their most dangerous elements. First, machine gunners, RPG teams, anyone with heavy weapons or who appeared to be giving orders. It was textbook, military doctrine executed with brutal efficiency. "Whoever they are, they just saved our lives," Ortiz said. Reyes wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Unknown factors in combat situations were dangerous, regardless of whose side they appeared to be on. But the enemy was clearly rattled. Their organized assault had dissolved into chaos as fighters scrambled for cover, unable to identify where the shots were originating from. "The ghost," someone shouted in the distance, the words carrying across the canyon in accented English. "The ghost of the night forest is here." Reyes saw fear spreading through the Brotherhood ranks. Whoever this sniper was, they had a reputation that terrified these hardened fighters. Men who'd fought without hesitation suddenly looked ready to break and run. The heavy DSHK machine gun opened up again, its operator spraying rounds wildly toward where he thought the sniper might be hiding. The response was immediate, a single shot that silenced the weapon permanently. Then 2 more shots in rapid succession that eliminated the fighters who'd been feeding ammunition into the gun. "They're using a bolt-action rifle," Hawk observed. "Listen to the cadence between shots. That's not semi-automatic. They're working the bolt, rechambering manually, and still maintaining that rate of fire." Which meant the shooter was even more skilled than Reyes had initially estimated. Operating a bolt-action rifle under combat conditions, in a rainstorm, at ranges exceeding 700 meters, and achieving a 100% hit rate required abilities that bordered on supernatural. The Brotherhood fighters were pulling back now, dragging their wounded and leaving their dead where they fell. The relief Reyes felt was tempered by uncertainty about what came next. They'd been saved, yes, but by whom, and why? "Commander," Mason said, pointing toward the eastern ridge. Movement. Through his night vision, Reyes saw a figure emerge from what appeared to be solid rock face. They wore a ghillie suit so perfectly constructed that even knowing where to look, he could barely distinguish them from the surrounding terrain. The figure moved with careful deliberation, covering ground in a low crawl that kept them nearly invisible. "Everyone hold fire," Reyes ordered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The figure approached their position, weapons slung across their back, hands visible and empty of threats. As they drew closer, Reyes noticed details, the custom modifications to their gear, the way they moved that spoke of extensive field experience, the calculated caution of someone who'd survived a long time in hostile territory. When they were 20 meters away, the figure stopped and raised both hands slowly. Then they reached up and pulled back the ghillie suit's hood, revealing features Reyes recognized immediately, despite 8 months and changed circumstances. "Lena Cross," he said, his voice flat with shock. "Commander Reyes," she responded. "You look like hell." Lena Cross had been declared killed in action 8 months ago after a joint task force operation went catastrophically wrong along the northern border. Her entire team had been ambushed and overwhelmed. Radio intercepts confirmed multiple American casualties. A recovery mission had found 3 bodies, but Lena's had never been located. Eventually, Command had made the hardest decision, declaring her dead and moving on. Except she wasn't dead. She was standing in front of Reyes, very much alive, covered in mud and carrying a rifle that had just eliminated approximately 20 enemy fighters. "We thought you were gone," Reyes said. "I was, in a way." Lena studied the SEAL team, her gaze lingering on Viper's injuries. "Your man needs proper medical attention, and you're all about 12 minutes from getting shelled by mortars. The Brotherhood has teams moving into position on the western ridge." "How do you know that?" Because I've been living in these mountains for 8 months, Commander. I know every rock, every path, every position they use. I've made it my business to know. Hawk kept his rifle ready but not aimed. You've been out here alone for 8 months. Why didn't you try to contact command? Because the people who ambushed my team knew where we'd be, when we'd be there, and exactly how many of us were coming. Someone with access to classified operations fed that information to the enemy. Until I know who, I stay dead. It was the same conclusion Reyes had reached after seeing the tablet data. Someone was betraying American operations to the Brotherhood. Lena had figured it out 8 months ago and made the hard choice to disappear rather than risk walking back into another trap. The data we recovered confirms your suspicion, Reyes told her. There's a leak in the operational chain. I know. I've been tracking it. The Brotherhood calls him the Provider. He's given them intelligence on 17 operations over the past year. Your mission tonight was just the latest. Ortiz was still working on Viper, who'd lost consciousness from blood loss and pain. With all due respect to this reunion, we need to move. Now. Lena nodded. There's a cave system 200 meters east. I've been using it as a base. It's defensible, invisible from the air, and has supplies I've cached. But we need to move before those mortars get set up. Why should we trust you? Mason asked. The question was blunt but necessary. Because if I wanted you dead, I would have let the Brotherhood finish the job. Instead, I just saved your lives. Lena's expression hardened. But trust is earned, not given. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to follow me to safety. Then we're going to have a conversation about how we all get out of this valley alive. And after that, we're going to discuss exactly how we track down the Provider and end this. Reyes made his decision. Ortiz, can Viper be moved? He'll scream, but yeah, better than staying here. Then we move. Lena takes point. Hawk, rear guard. Everyone else, standard formation. Move quietly, move quickly. They gathered their gear and prepared to follow this ghost who'd returned from the dead. As they moved out, Reyes heard the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar fire. The rounds impacted exactly where they'd been positioned 30 seconds earlier, turning the boulder field into a crater. Told you 12 minutes, Lena said without looking back. The cave entrance was nearly invisible, a narrow crack in the rock face partially obscured by overhanging vegetation. Lena led them through in single file, the passage so tight that they had to remove their gear and push it ahead of them. Inside, the space opened into a chamber roughly 30 feet across, with a ceiling high enough to stand in comfortably. Welcome to my home, Lena said, activating a small LED lantern that cast soft blue light across the space. What Reyes saw was simultaneously impressive and concerning. She'd established a complete survival-based sleeping area, weapons maintenance station, medical supplies, dried food stores, water filtration system, and a communications array cobbled together from salvaged equipment. Maps covered one wall, marked with enemy positions, patrol routes, and attack patterns. Another wall held photographs, faces of Brotherhood fighters, some marked with red X's. You've been hunting them, Mason observed. They hunted me first. I returned the favor. Lena helped Ortiz lay Viper on a sleeping mat. Medical supplies are in the green pack. I've got antibiotics, surgical equipment, everything you'll need for the leg wound. While Ortiz worked on Viper, Lena showed Reyes her intelligence wall. She'd been conducting a one-woman reconnaissance and interdiction campaign against the Brotherhood for months. The red X's marked confirmed kills, 23 in total, all high-value targets who'd been systematically eliminated. This is obsession, Reyes said. This is survival, Lena corrected. Every man I kill is one less hunting me. Every operation I disrupt is one less American team walking into an ambush. I've been doing more damage as a ghost than I ever did as part of an official unit. Hawk examined her rifle, a custom-built bolt-action precision weapon with modifications Reyes had never seen before. This is exceptional work. Who built it? I did. Took me 3 months and parts from 5 different weapons systems. Effective range is just over 1,300 meters in optimal conditions. I've taken confirmed kills at 900 in weather like tonight. The weapon represented countless hours of meticulous labor, the work of someone with nothing but time and an overwhelming drive to perfect their craft. Reyes recognized the signs Lena had gone native, adapted to a life of solitary warfare that most people couldn't sustain for 8 weeks, let alone 8 months. The provider, Reyes said, bringing them back to the critical issue. What do you know? Lena pulled out a battered tablet, likely salvaged from a Brotherhood fighter. He communicates through encrypted channels, always different, never traceable. But I've been monitoring their radio traffic and mapping information flow. 3 weeks ago, I intercepted a message that mentioned your unit specifically. That's how I knew you were coming tonight. So you set up Overwatch. I've been in position since yesterday afternoon. When I saw the trap they'd prepared, I knew your team was walking into a slaughter. I couldn't warn you without breaking radio silence, so I waited. Figured I'd even the odds. Once the shooting started, Mason handed around water bottles from Lena's supplies. So what's the plan? We can't stay here forever, and we can't fight our way out against those numbers. The storm breaks in approximately 8 hours, Lena said. Once it clears, we'll have a 4-hour window before the next system moves in. That's our extraction opportunity. But the Brotherhood knows you're here, which means they'll have every access point covered. We need to create a diversion that draws their forces away from the extraction zone. With 5 combat-capable personnel and limited ammunition, Hawk said, against 70+ enemy fighters who know this terrain as well as you do. Actually, they don't know it as well as I do. Not anymore. Lena pointed to a section of her map that showed a network of tunnels running beneath the valley. Old mining passages. Most are collapsed, but 3 are still navigable. The Brotherhood doesn't know about them because I've been very careful to hide my movements. We use the tunnels to reposition, hit them from unexpected angles, and force them to spread their forces thin. Reyes studied the map, calculating angles and timing. It was audacious, bordering on reckless, but so was their entire situation. We'd need to coordinate movements precisely. Any mistakes and we get cut off underground with no escape, which is why we need to run this like a professional operation, not a desperate escape. Lena's tone carried command authority despite her months outside the military structure. I've had 8 months to plan every contingency. Trust that I know what I'm doing. Ortiz looked up from treating Viper. He's stabilized, but he needs a hospital within 24 hours. After that, infection risk becomes critical. Then we make sure we're all on that extraction bird, Lena said. Commander, I'm asking to temporarily attach to your unit for this operation. I know you have concerns about my mental state and my methods, but right now, I'm your best chance of getting your men home alive. Reyes met her eyes, reading the determination and calculating rationality there. Yes, she'd changed. Yes, she'd adapted to an extreme lifestyle that had reshaped her into something harder and more dangerous. But underneath that, he recognized the same professional warrior who'd earned her place in elite special operations. Welcome back to the team, Cross, he said. They spent the next 3 hours planning the operation with the thoroughness their training demanded. Lena spread her maps across the cave floor, while the team gathered around, studying terrain features and memorizing critical waypoints. The Brotherhood has established 3 primary defensive positions, Lena explained, marking them with different colored markers. Alpha position covers the main access road. Bravo position controls the ridge overlooking the gorge. Charlie position guards the northern extraction site where you'd logically call for pickup. They've got heavy weapons at all 3. So we avoid all 3, Mason said. Can't. The extraction site needs to be the plateau on the eastern rim. It's the only location with enough open space for a helicopter landing, and enough standoff distance to provide covering fire. But to reach it, we have to move through Charlie position's observation range. Hawk traced a path on the map. What if we use the tunnels to bypass Charlie, emerge here, and create a diversion that pulls them away from the extraction point? That's the framework. But we need to make the diversion credible enough that they commit significant forces. Lena looked at Viper, who'd regained consciousness and was listening through a morphine haze. We've got demolitions expertise. What if we make them think we're trying to blow the dam? Everyone looked at her. The dam was a massive structure 2 kilometers north, built decades ago during a mining boom and now providing water to several villages. Destroying it would be a strategic disaster that would kill civilians and create an international incident. We're not actually blowing the dam, Reyes said carefully. Of course not, but we make them think we are. I've got enough explosive material cached to stage a convincing demonstration. We send a small team to the dam, they set visible charges, make a lot of noise. The Brotherhood has to respond because if that dam goes, it takes out their base camp in the valley below. While their forces are racing toward the dam, The rest of us moved to the extraction point, Ortiz finished. Classic misdirection. The problem is the team at the dam, Mason pointed out. They'll be trapped between the water and enemy forces. How do they extract? Lena pulled out another map, this one showing underwater topography. There's a service tunnel that runs through the dam structure. It exits on the eastern bank, about 50 meters downstream. Once they've set the demo and created the panic, they drop through the maintenance access, navigate the tunnel, and emerge outside the enemy perimeter. Navigate a pitch-black service tunnel while being pursued, Hawk said. In flood conditions from the storm. I've done it twice. It's terrifying but survivable. Reyes considered the plan from multiple angles, looking for fatal flaws. It was risky, required split-second timing, and depended on the Brotherhood reacting exactly as predicted. But the alternative was trying to shoot their way through superior numbers and fortified positions with inadequate ammunition. Who goes to the dam? He asked. I do, Lena said immediately. I know the structure, I know the tunnel, and I'm the only one who can make the shots needed to sell the deception. I'll need one person with me for security and to help place the demo. I'll go, Hawk volunteered. Recon's my specialty, and if things go wrong, I'm the best equipped to adapt. Reyes wanted to argue, to say he should be the one taking the most dangerous role. But command meant making hard decisions based on capabilities, not ego. Hawk and Lena were the right choices for the dam operation. Ortiz, you stay with Viper and set up the extraction site. Mason and I will provide covering fire and secure the perimeter once we're in position. Reyes looked at each of them in turn. We move out in 4 hours. That gives us time to rest, eat, and prep gear. Once we start, we don't stop until everyone's on that helicopter or everyone's dead. Questions? Yeah, Viper said weakly from his sleeping mat. When this is over, can someone please find the provider and shoot him for me? That's the next mission, Lena said. First, we survived this one. They settled into preparation routines developed through years of professional training. Weapons were cleaned and checked. Ammunition was redistributed to ensure each person had enough for their specific role. Lena shared her food supplies, military rations she'd been taking from dead Brotherhood fighters, supplemented by local plants she'd learned to identify as edible. While the others worked, Reyes pulled Lena aside. I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. Are you stable? Can you handle being part of a team again after 8 months alone? She didn't bristle at the question, which he took as a good sign. I won't lie and say I'm the same person who went into that ambush. I've changed. Living like this changes you. But I'm still mission capable. I can still function as part of a unit. And once we're out of here, I'll submit to whatever psychological evaluation command requires. That's not what concerns me. I'm asking because your survival depends on the team, and the team's survival depends on you. I need to know you can trust us the way we're trusting you. Lena was quiet for a moment, watching the others work with practiced efficiency. I've been alone so long that I forgot what it felt like to have people watching my back. It's uncomfortable, but in a good way. Yeah, Commander. I can do this. Good. Because that damn operation is the linchpin of this entire plan. They rejoined the others, and Reyes allowed himself a few hours of rest. The cave was cold, damp, and uncomfortable. The smell of mud and blood hung in the air. Viper's labored breathing provided an irregular rhythm. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountains. But they were alive. Against impossible odds, they'd survived. And in a few hours, they'd risk everything on one final gamble to get home. The tunnels were exactly as nightmarish as Reyes had imagined. Water dripped from ceiling, pooled on floors, and created echoing sounds that made navigation by hearing impossible. They moved in single file, each person maintaining physical contact with the one ahead to prevent anyone getting separated in the absolute darkness. Lena led, her knowledge of the passages preventing them from taking wrong turns into collapsed sections or dead ends. Twice they had to crawl through spaces barely wide enough for their bodies. Once they waded through waist-deep water that stank of minerals and decay. After 90 minutes of underground travel, they reached a junction point. This is where we split up, Lena whispered. Commander, your path continues straight for another click, then angles up to the eastern plateau. You'll emerge 300 meters from the extraction site. Hawk and I go left toward the dam. Radio check in 30 minutes, Reyes confirmed. They were using short-range tactical radios that wouldn't be detected by the Brotherhood's jamming equipment. 30 minutes, Lena confirmed. Then she and Hawk disappeared into the darkness. Reyes led his reduced team through the remaining tunnel section. When they finally emerged, dawn was beginning to break through the storm clouds. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, and visibility had improved to maybe 300 meters. Extraction site is that flat area, Reyes pointed. Ortiz, get Viper positioned. Mason, you're with me on Overwatch. They established defensive positions, while Ortiz set up a makeshift landing zone marker using chemical lights. Viper was placed in a protected depression where he'd be shielded from indirect fire. The injured SEAL was barely conscious, but gave Reyes a thumbs up that said he was still in the fight. Meanwhile, 2 kilometers north, Lena and Hawk approached the dam through a maintenance access tunnel that smelled of rust and standing water. They emerged onto a catwalk that ran along the dam's western face, 30 meters above the water level. Demo placement, Lena instructed, pulling explosive blocks from her pack. They weren't military-grade C4, those were too valuable to waste on a deception. Instead, Lena had prepared packages that combined small amounts of explosives with smoke generators and flashbang components. They'd create dramatic visual effects and impressive sounds without actually damaging the dam structure. Make them visible, Lena said. We want the Brotherhood to see what we're doing. Hawk placed the charges at strategic points along the dam face, each one positioned to be obvious to observers. He wired them together with bright orange det cord that would have made any real demolition expert cringe at the visibility. But visibility was the point. 3 minutes until full light, Hawk reported. Right on schedule, Lena heard voices shouting in the valley below. Brotherhood fighters had spotted them on the dam. Perfect. She raised her rifle and fired 3 shots toward the nearest enemy position, not aiming to kill, just to announce their presence and create urgency. The response was immediate. Radio traffic exploded with panicked reports. Fighters began mobilizing from all 3 defensive positions, rushing toward the dam to prevent what they believed was an imminent catastrophic attack. That's our cue, Lena said. Set the timer for 4 minutes. That gives us enough margin to reach the service tunnel. Hawk programmed the electronic trigger, double-checked the sequence, then activated it. 4 minutes, clocks running. They sprinted along the catwalk toward the maintenance access point. Behind them, the Brotherhood was committing everything to stopping the perceived dam attack. Dozens of fighters were racing up the access road. Others were attempting to climb the dam face itself. Maintenance access, 30 seconds. Lena counted down. They reached the heavy steel door, and Lena worked the manual override. The door swung open, revealing a vertical shaft with a ladder descending into darkness. Water roared somewhere below the dam's overflow system, processing the storm runoff. Down, Lena ordered. They climbed rapidly, their hands slipping on wet metal rungs. The shaft seemed to descend forever, lit only by occasional emergency lights that flickered in the humid air. Above them, they heard the Brotherhood fighters reaching the catwalk, shouting coordinates and orders. 2 minutes, Hawk said. They reached the bottom of the shaft and found themselves in a horizontal tunnel, barely 4 feet high. Water flowed through it at knee depth, rushing toward the outlet with considerable force. They bent low and began wading, fighting the current, using handholds along the tunnel walls to maintain balance. 1 minute. The tunnel stretched ahead, curving slightly. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly green glow. The water was freezing, and the current was strong enough that Lena had to concentrate on every step to avoid being swept away. 30 seconds. We need to be clear of the dam structure. They pushed harder, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring the cold. The tunnel began to angle upward slightly, which meant they were approaching the exit point. Through the rush of water, Lena heard other sounds, muffled, gunfire, shouting, the Brotherhood forces engaging what they thought was a demolition team. 10 seconds. The tunnel exit appeared ahead, a metal grate that opened onto the eastern riverbank. Lena reached it first, worked the emergency release, and pushed the grate open. They scrambled out onto muddy ground, rolled away from the opening, and covered their heads. The demo charges detonated exactly on schedule. The explosions weren't powerful enough to damage the dam, but they created spectacular fireballs and massive smoke clouds that billowed across the structure. Flashbangs added thunder and lightning. To anyone watching, it looked like a catastrophic failure. Brotherhood fighters on the dam, scattered in panic, convinced the structure was about to collapse. Those below began running for higher ground, abandoning their defensive positions entirely. The deception had worked perfectly. "All call signs, this is Hawk," he transmitted on the tactical radio. "Dam objective complete, diversion successful, enemy forces fully committed, proceeding to extraction point." Reyes's voice came back instantly. "Copy, Hawk. We have visual on extraction bird, ETA 6 minutes. Move fast." Lena and Hawk ran through the forest along the riverbank, angling toward the eastern plateau. Behind them, the Brotherhood's command structure was collapsing into chaos as they realized too late that the dam attack had been a feint. The helicopter appeared right on schedule, a Black Hawk with door gunners already scanning for threats. It swept across the valley, using terrain masking to avoid enemy observation, and began its approach to the plateau. "Smoke out," Reyes ordered. Ortiz popped colored smoke grenades that billowed purple, the designated marking for friendly positions. The Black Hawk pilot acknowledged and began his landing approach, the massive rotors beating the air into submission. That's when the Brotherhood realized what was happening. Radio intercepts showed their command element frantically redirecting forces away from the dam toward the extraction site. But they were 2 kilometers out of position, with rough terrain between them and the plateau. By the time they could bring effective fire to bear, the SEAL team would be gone, unless something went wrong. The Black Hawk flared for landing, its skids touching down on the wet ground. The door gunners maintained overwatch, while the crew chief waved urgently for the team to board. "Viper first," Reyes ordered. Ortiz and Mason carried the injured man toward the helicopter. Viper was conscious enough to give the crew chief a weak salute as they lifted him aboard. Ortiz followed, helping secure him for the flight. That left Reyes and Mason holding the perimeter, waiting for Lena and Hawk to arrive. Through his rifle scope, Reyes could see Brotherhood fighters emerging from the tree line 400 meters away. They were setting up firing positions, preparing to engage the helicopter. "Where are they?" Mason muttered, searching for their teammates. There, Reyes spotted them, 2 figures running full speed across open ground, with enemy fighters in pursuit, covering fire. He and Mason began shooting, carefully aimed shots that forced the pursuers to seek cover rather than maintain their pursuit. The door gunners joined in, their heavy machine guns raking the tree line and forcing the Brotherhood to keep their heads down. Lena and Hawk reached the plateau with 50 meters to go. Behind them, a Brotherhood fighter appeared on a ridge overlooking the extraction site, armed with an RPG launcher. "RPG!" Mason shouted. The fighter raised the weapon, preparing to destroy the helicopter before anyone could stop him. But Lena had seen him too. Without breaking stride, she unslung her rifle, dropped to one knee, and fired in a single fluid motion that demonstrated 8 months of constant practice. The shot took the RPG gunner in the chest at 300 meters, and he toppled backward off the ridge. "That's my exit shot," Lena said, reaching the helicopter with Hawk right behind her. Everyone scrambled aboard. The crew chief slammed the door closed and hammered the bulkhead. "Go, go, go!" The Black Hawk lifted off, its turbines screaming as it clawed for altitude. Enemy gunfire followed them up. Small arms, tracers, desperate shots from fighters who'd been outmaneuvered and outsmarted. But the pilot was experienced, using terrain and speed to put distance between them and the threat. Within 2 minutes, they were clear of the valley, flying east toward friendly territory. Inside the helicopter, 6 people who'd faced death together sat in exhausted silence. Ortiz continued monitoring Viper's vital signs. Mason stared out the window, watching the mountains recede. Hawk cleaned his rifle with automatic movements. Lena sat with her custom-built weapon across her lap, her ghillie suit still covered in mud from the tunnels. After 8 months alone, after countless nights wondering if she'd ever make it home, she was finally leaving the mountains that had been both her prison and her kingdom. Reyes sat beside her. "How do you feel?" "Exhausted. Relieved. Angry about the provider. Worried about the debrief." She paused. "Grateful to be alive. When we land, there'll be questions. Medical evaluations. Psych assessments. Debriefings that last for days. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is." Lena watched the sunrise beginning to paint the clouds in shades of orange and gold. "But at least I won't be alone anymore." The Black Hawk continued east, carrying 6 warriors home from a battle that would never be officially acknowledged, to rest they'd barely earned before the next mission called. 3 weeks later, Reyes stood in a secure briefing room at a location that didn't officially exist. Around the table sat Lena, Hawk, Mason, and Ortiz. Viper was still in medical recovery, but video conferenced in from his hospital room. Also present were 3 senior intelligence officers who'd spent weeks analyzing the data recovered from Korash Valley. "We found him," the senior officer said without preamble. "The provider. His real name is Thomas Crawford, and he was a contractor with TSSCI clearance working in operational planning." "Was?" Lena asked. "He's currently in custody at an undisclosed facility. He confessed to selling intelligence on 17 operations over 14 months. The Brotherhood paid him in cryptocurrency, which he thought was untraceable." The officer pulled up a photo, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and tired eyes. "He claims he only provided information on what he called low-value missions. Said he never intended for anyone to get killed." "He's lying," Reyes said flatly. "He knew exactly what he was doing." "Agreed. The Justice Department is building a case that will put him away for the rest of his life. But we wanted you to know before it becomes public. You earned that much." After the briefing, the team gathered in a break room. They'd been through extensive debriefings, psychological evaluations, and medical examinations. The official story was being carefully crafted to hide Lena's 8 months in the wilderness and the Brotherhood's penetration of military intelligence. "So what happens now?" Mason asked. "SEAL Team 6 Delta is being officially reconstituted," Reyes said. "Command is offering all of us the option to return to active operations or transition to training roles. No pressure either way." "I'm staying in," Hawk said immediately. "Someone has to keep you idiots alive." "Same," Mason agreed. Ortiz nodded. "I've got a few more missions in me before I consider retirement." Everyone looked at Lena. She'd been offered multiple paths: return to active duty, accept a medical discharge with full benefits, or transition to a consulting role where her unique experience could benefit future operations. "I spent 8 months alone because I was afraid to trust anyone," she said. "Then you all risked your lives based on nothing but faith that I was telling the truth. I owe you for that. More importantly, I owe it to myself to finish what I started out there. So yes, I'm staying in. If you'll have me." "Welcome back to 6 Delta," Reyes said, extending his hand. She shook it, and for the first time in 8 months, Lena Cross felt like she was truly home. The team that had gone into Korash Valley was changed by what they'd experienced there. They'd seen the worst of what could happen when trust was betrayed, and the best of what could be achieved when warriors stood together. They'd learned that sometimes ghosts return from the dead, that impossible situations can be survived with skill and courage, and that the bonds forged in combat transcend everything else. As they walked out of the briefing facility together, 6 professionals prepared to face whatever came next, they knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Brotherhood had learned a painful lesson about fighting Americans who refused to quit. The ghost of the night forest had reminded them that warriors who survive the darkness become something more dangerous than anyone can imagine. The valley had tried to kill them and failed. Now they were stronger, wiser, and ready for the next impossible mission. Behind them, data analysts were still working through the intelligence recovered from the operation. New missions were being planned, new threats were being identified. The war continued, as it always did. But for one team of elite warriors, there was a moment of peace. They'd survived together. They'd lost blood together. They'd proven that even when surrounded and outnumbered, Americans never stop fighting. Somewhere in those mountains, the Brotherhood was learning to fear the sound of a single rifle shot in the darkness. They were learning that some ghosts don't stay dead. They were learning that crossing paths with SEAL Team 6 Delta was the last mistake many of them would ever make. And in training facilities across the country, the story was already becoming legend the night a SEAL team was saved by a sniper who'd been dead for 8 months. Young warriors listened and learned. The impossible could be survived. Betrayal